What I wanted to do to open up the show today is talk about the NL MVP race because Shohei Ohtani is an overwhelming favorite. You look at the odds from BetMGM, he is at minus 1,400. So very significant that everyone's sort of expecting Ohtani to end up being the MVP, and for good reason. He has 34 home runs and 32 stolen bases as the Dodgers DH this year and is leading the National League when it comes to Fangraphs wins above replacement. But Elly De La Cruz is right there. Ketel Marte is on a good run. Is he as much of a favorite as the odds would suggest? Because I don't think that the odds are necessarily right with how open I still think this NL MVP race kind of is.
I think the odds are what everyone thinks they should be. And so
Okay.
in that way, they are correct. But as we are going to dig into here in just a moment, it's a lot closer than a lot of people might think. And if you're looking at certain metrics, you can make the case that Ohtani is not the MVP. He's in the conversation, even in the most worst case scenario. Even if you can find some disparaging statistics or incredibly favorable statistics for someone like an Elly De La Cruz or Ketel Marte, who I think is probably the one you make the best case for, it still feels like this is all about Shohei Ohtani and everyone else has to figure it out. It really does seem like after you get to the trade deadline and once you get past that, it's almost a whole new season. So, hey, awesome. Nice job. You're on your way to 40-40. But what are you doing for the final 2 months of the season? Now we're 7-8 weeks away from game 162. And this is where someone like the Dodgers, if they lose their hold on the NL West, and someone like the Diamondbacks with Ketel Marte, if he leads the way, you could have somewhat of a surprising upset. But we'll dig into some of the numbers now to suggest, you know what, it's a little bit more Ketel Marte, I think, than people realize.
Yeah, Elly De La Cruz is the guy that is atop the WAR leaderboards, but to me, Ketel Marte is the clear runner-up right now, and the odds would suggest that as well. He's at plus 600. The fact that there is a chance right now, we will talk about the Dodgers and their hold on the NL West, but it's not as big of a lead as one would have thought at this stage of the season. I think that would be the slam dunk way that Ketel Marte would all of a sudden become the NL MVP. If he somehow led the Diamondbacks to win the NL West, I think there'd be too much of an argument for Marte. But just looking at the stats right now, Ketel Marte is almost at 30 home runs. He's got 29. He's hitting 295, 366 on base, 553 slug, a 149 weighted runs created plus. He's only a half a win behind Ohtani when it comes to WAR, and he is leading his team as the clear-cut best player, not only from out of the playoff mix entirely, but now, like we said, into even the NL West race. So it's been a pretty crazy run for Marte and the Diamondbacks.
I want to talk about something here because this year for me, it's really seemed to have jumped out to the forefront and it's worth discussing. And a lot of fans probably might not be thinking along these lines. Fangraphs wins above replacement versus Baseball Reference wins above replacement. I think you're talking about Marte being in second there using Fangraphs, right? And I've been looking at Baseball Reference, and I think they're both important tools, right? But one is about their actual results, and one is about what the results probably should have been, and for giving you context of maybe this guy's getting a little bit unlucky, and so expect more from them, or they've been unlucky, whatever side of the coin you're on. Ketel Marte statistically is the best player in the National League. When you look at Baseball References, wins above replacement, that is giving credit to what the actual results are. Again, if you got lucky here or there and that ball went out of 1 out of 30 ballparks, if you got 10 unicorn home runs out of your 29, which would be almost an impossibility, but if 10 of Ketel Marte's 29 home runs were unicorns, only a home run in that one ballpark that he played in, it doesn't matter. He hit 29 home runs. We can't take that away from a player. And so Fangraphs does take that away from players, whereas Baseball Reference doesn't. So to me, when it comes to the MVP conversation, I really think it should start and end with Baseball Reference's version of WAR. And then, you know what, if you need to break a couple ties and you need to look at things, then you go over to Fangraphs. But for me, just looking at what the end results were, not what they should have been, I'm looking at Baseball Reference, and that's got Ketel Marte head and shoulders above Ketel Marte. Ketel Marte is head and shoulders above Ohtani right now.
Yeah, and that's very interesting, the difference that you find between those two. And the one thing also is I don't understand always how the defense weighs in, because like you'll have a player like Matt Chapman who has a significant difference between Baseball Reference WAR and Fangraphs WAR. Is that just because his actual results are better than the underlying ones that Fangraphs might have, or is it how they grade defense? Is it how they are which metric is Baseball Reference using compared to the one that Fangraphs is using for the defensive side of things? So I think you have to look at both of them. And Marte being half a win behind in Fangraphs and being ahead of Ohtani in Baseball Reference, that is a big notch on his ledger there to make him the MVP at this stage. Offensively, Ohtani's been the best player in the National League. But how much do we knock him for not playing in the field? How much do we credit Ketel Marte for what he's done to be not only out there leading the offense, but still being a really solid defensive second baseman? I think that's what voters are going to have to decide.
I think Ohtani deserves to get knocked severely for being a DH only. We've seen it through the history of baseball since the introduction of the designated hitter. We've not had a DH win that award, and there's been some guys who had great cases, but they're only playing half of the game. I think oftentimes we see highlights of mostly of guys with great hits, right? And you see some wonderful defensive plays, but at the same time, that ho hum 4-3 over to first base, someone's got to make that play. Ketel Marte is making that play for his team. Shohei Ohtani is sitting on the bench. He's got one of those massage guns going on his thighs, getting ready to try to steal 40 bases. He's not playing half of the game. And that's unfortunate, right? Because he would be out there. I'm sure it'll be interesting to see what happens in his career with the Dodgers. If we start to see him play more outfield, I think that very much could be a possibility. And he can't get credit for pitching, right, this season after having that reconstructive elbow surgery. So it's just unfortunate. But right now in 2024, if we're talking about the best player in baseball, if you're not playing defense, that is going to ding you a bit. And that's why players like Matt Chapman, as you point out, that kind of helps push along the narrative that he deserves to be in the conversation. It's going to be hard if the Giants don't get into the postseason. But if Ketel Marte can continue to elevate the Dodgers into October and win that NL West, I mean, that right there, that's who your MVP in the National League is going to be, whoever ends up winning the NL West.
Yeah, that honestly is going to factor in a pretty big way if the Dodgers aren't the team. If the Dodgers end up just finishing it out like we all expect them to, then I think it's just going to be a matter of how much have the Diamondbacks made that a race. What's Ketel Marte look like down the stretch? I do want to note here that since June, Ketel Marte has been the best player in the National League. He's hitting 328, 415 on base, 642 slug. The batting average trails only Brian Reynolds, Jackson Churio. The on-base percentage only Kyle Schwarber. The slug is better than Shohei Ohtani's, the best mark in the National League, as is his 186 WRC plus, and he has 19 home runs. So during this span since June, only one home run less than Shohei Ohtani, and he has been the best player when it comes to WAR, tied with Francisco Lindor at 3.6 wins above replacement since June.
Francisco Lindor needs to come up in this conversation too in a moment. Another thing with Marte, Ohtani, you talked about the defense kind of being critical in this conversation. How about that value of the player, right? So much is made of those seasons. Andre Dawson, Alex Rodriguez, a team finishes in last place. Steve Carlton winning a Cy Young. That's a little bit different. That's just an individual player award. But the V in MVP is value, like what you're contributing to your team. And if your team is not making the postseason, and if they're one of the worst in the game, you don't really have that much value. So you get dinged for that, rightly or wrongly, whatever it is. Shohei Ohtani has got some very talented teammates, right? Also in the top 10 for B-WAR on his own team is Mookie Betts and Freddie Freeman. They're right there, just under 4. Betts, of course, has missed a lot of this season, but Freddie Freeman there all the time. Who does Ketel Marte have to lean on? Who else is pushing the Diamondbacks into the postseason and carrying them, as you said, since June? Ketel Marte has been that guy. So Jack Peterson, another DH only kind of player, and Christian Walker, who has been on the shelf for a little while, they're at 2.6 wins above replacement. according to Baseball Reference. So Ketel Marte is doing a lot of heavy lifting on his own. Shohei Ohtani, not so much.
Yeah, he is for sure. And I will shout out, since I do have the stats pulled, Eugenio Suarez, unbelievable since June as well.
Yeah, true.
13 home runs. He's been very strong, and that's been a big reason why this Diamondbacks lineup, along with Jock Peterson, all those guys, have really taken off. You said we're going to get to Francisco Lindor, so I'll touch on it now. From covering this guy day over day here with Locked On Mets, what I have to say is he might not win the award, but this might be his career year. And when you talk about most valuable, Francisco Lindor has been that for the New York Mets. The leadership that he has shown, the way he has brought them back in this race. And you saw in that series against the Rockies, the first two games were not going the Mets' way at all. And they really just couldn't score in that second game. They needed to win that to get the series even. And it was Lindor that came through with the big hit. Lindor in the third game of the series leads it off with the double, and that starts a rally. Francisco Lindor has been so good. And then it's the fact that he gives you great defense at shortstop. He really does have his fingerprints on every aspect of the game for the Mets. And so while I don't think he's going to win the award ultimately, because his offensive numbers just aren't quite there with Marte and certainly not there with Ohtani, when it comes to value to a team as a leader, I would make the case, narrative based alone, no one has been more valuable than Francisco Lindor for their team.
I think he'll finish higher in the MVP voting this year than he has to date. 2017, he was 5th in AL
Yep.
MVP voting, and I think it's pretty safe that he's going to be in that top 5 range. I think the thing that could hinder him is, again, Pete Alonso. He's starting to heat up 2 home runs on Thursday in Colorado. So you have both of those guys working together, working in tandem. That's great for the Mets. Hard for each individual man making their own MVP case. So he may have to start to separate himself just a little bit from Pete Alonso. That's a good problem for the Mets. Bad problem for Francisco Lindor, who, you're right, a lot of the intangibles that the New York daily beat reporters are seeing. You're right, like as you said, the fingerprints are all over it. Their comeback, this resurgence. So Lindor definitely needs to be in this conversation.
Yeah, I think he'll end up finishing third, honestly. I think it'll come down to Marte or Ohtani, and then I think Lindor will get a third place finish, which would be, like you said, the highest of his career.
We're not going to see any of the pitchers really in the conversation.
I can't
Hunter
see it.
Green is tops right now for B WAR. Paul Skeens is number 2 in B WAR for pitchers in the National League. So good stories. These guys will get votes. We know that. But as far as like the number 1 guy, it's unless you have a historic season as a pitcher, you're not going to do it. Unless you're having a very, very, very good year, maybe just shy of historic as a pitcher, and you're boosting your team into the playoffs. Great, but that's not going to happen for the Reds. It could happen for the Pirates. We'll wait and see.
Yeah, I mean, I'd even look at Chris Sale, who's 13-3 with a 2.75, and clearly the best pitcher on the Braves. But I don't even know if the Braves are going to make the playoffs, and even if they do, I don't think that narrative alone is going to carry him to the MVP. I think the best pitchers that have their award in the Cy Young, I don't think anyone is trending towards a triple crown or something where they can win that award like a Verlander did in the past. So